Ian, welcome. I guess I should say welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Our first second timer. Thank you for agreeing to join us again and have another fantastic conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Jared. I feel like a bit of a pioneer and also very fortunate to get a second opportunity to speak to your audience and to have a thoughtful and hopefully thought provoking conversation with you because I really enjoyed the first one, clearly.
I, I can't wait. Can't wait. It's gonna be fun. All right, let's dive right in. What, in your mind, is innovation?
So I was thinking about this a lot and I didn't want to repeat the definition I used last time I was on your show, which is probably the first time that you've had to encounter that. But I've alighted on a specific definition, which will hopefully lead us into a conversation that I want to kind of steer us to. Because I want to warn you and your audience, I'm feeling quite provocative today. I'm going to put that
Awesome.
out there. But for me, creativity is about having ideas, and innovation is about having ideas to solve specific problems. So, another
Mm,
way to look at
okay.
it is that creativity is inspiration, and
Mm,
innovation is inspiration with intention.
got it. Got it. Inspiration with intention. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. Uh, Go
And I,
ahead. Let's
and I was going
unpack
to
it.
say, if I can
Hmm.
launch off that, because I knew that we were going to start
Yeah.
where we always start, which is at the definition of innovation. My contention, and this is where I'm going to be provocative, is that according to that definition of innovation, which is inspiration plus intention,
Mm,
I believe that we are at a very perilous moment where innovation, specifically human innovation, is at risk. And
mm,
I'm happy to break it down, but it really is anchoring around these two ideas, inspiration and intention, which I can happily embroider on. But this was something I've been thinking about for quite a while. It's been percolating in my mind for really the last couple of years, but especially in the last couple of months. And I think if I lead our conversation where I want to, I'm going to be able to link things like TikTok and Chat GPT. I'm going to be able
mm.
to name drop Andrew Huberman and Aristotle. And I'm going to compare the Rubik's Cube to Roblox, all
Oh, wow.
in the hopes of alerting your audience to a threat and an opportunity that is facing us today, but not the threat and opportunity that everybody thinks I'm going to talk about. So just kind of like
Mm.
want to tease the conversation a little bit.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Um, when we talk about inspiration and intention, uh, how? Tell me a bit about the inspiration piece. What is that, and what does it look like, or feel like in practice?
Sure. So I think everybody has an intuitive understanding of inspiration. It's the eureka moment, the epiphany, the aha, and it happens often serendipitously. I know
Mm,
for me, it happens in moments that are pretty predictable but still wonderful. So, in the shower, while I'm driving on a long drive, sometimes when I'm walking and kind of thinking without being completely focused on what I'm doing, inspiration
mm,
strikes. And so that kind of creativity, that spark, we've learned what goes into it. And I want to get into like the neuroscience and the kind of biochemical elements of creativity.
mm,
But I also want to alert our audience to the fact that that specific type of inspiration is actually at threat. And I guess I'll start to unravel my argument, which is that that kind of inspiration comes from this combination of circumstances, both your brain being primed to think about things, but maybe in a previous instance, and very specifically, a certain amount of white space or boredom that is
mm,
created when you're doing something that involves some of your attention, but not all of your attention. So the shower is a perfect example, or driving on a path that you've taken on many times. That's when inspiration can strike because your mind is just focused enough on the task that is automatic and at hand, but just loose enough that you can get inspiration. And my working theory is that there's a whole bunch of forces that have emerged in modern society that rob us of that boredom and of that white space that is crucial and critical to inspiration and therefore
mm.
innovation.
I see. I see. Now, this sort of circumstantial inspiration. feels like a set of, it feels, and you said this basically, but that it's a human trait. It's a humanistic sort of thing. It's not, it's older than innovation and the concept of innovation and all those things.
Yeah, I would say
Is that fair?
it's almost like a fundamental force in the universe, if I can get
Hmm.
cosmological. The idea of creativity and the idea of inspiration is innate to all of us, but it is not something that we can take for granted, in the sense that it can be something that can be increased and to some extent encouraged, or it can be kind of squelched and quieted as a voice. So it's a bit like a drive: hunger, thirst, sex, um, curiosity. I think is in
Hmm.
that kind of adjacent group of intellectual pursuits. But just like all of those things can be attenuated or enhanced, so too can the idea of inspiration or creativity be kind of dialed up or dialed down depending on their circumstances. So if you've just had a big meal, you're not hungry, but you will be hungry again in 12 to 16 hours. If you have just slaked your thirst, you're obviously not going to be dying for thirst. But if you've just played 3.5 hours of basketball, you're desperate to have a Gatorade. And I think
Mm.
we are born into this world with this desire to create and to be inspired and to inspire others with ideas or kind of action. But there are forces, and I'm not going to speak cryptically, I'll talk about those forces that are now starting to kind of squelch that opportunity for inspiration, mostly
Mm.
by the pleasant but actually ultimately very toxic form of distraction. And I think modern society today is so rife with supercharged distraction that we now are robbing ourselves willingly and I wouldn't say intentionally, but in a very volitional way, of
Hmm.
these moments that we would normally have used for inspiration, we now use for distraction. So the canonical example for me, which I fight every day, but with I sometimes succeed, is I go to my local coffee shop and I order my ice mocha at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And in that interstitial 60 to 90 seconds between the time I paid and the time I slide over to where the barista is and she or he hands me my ice mocha, the temptation is to fire up my phone and see what
Hmm.
is on Instagram, or who texted me, particularly if it vibrates. And it's those kinds of moments where inspiration used to strike, when you used to look up, look around the cafe, notice people, maybe have an idea, notice that something's going on. I sometimes had business model ideas and even business ideas at these cafes when I wasn't looking at my phone. And that is a classic example for me of those kind of moments of boredom that have been subsumed by these distraction engines that rob us of the first constituent element of innovation, which is, again, inspiration.
That's fascinating, and it rings true, in in my day to day experience, and I'm sure for listeners, we can all think of moments like that. What do you see as the sort of lag time on this? So if one of the critical ingredients of innovation is being sort of squelched,
Mm-hmm.
are we already feeling the effect of that now, or is this something that is going to sort of play out over time?
Yeah, so I would say the answer to both those questions is yes and yes. So yes, we are feeling those effects right now, and yes, we will actually have more of this problem in the future for
Mm.
different reasons. So if we come back to the definition of innovation, which is inspiration plus intention, I think that it's fairly non-controversial to say that these distraction engines, call it TikTok, Twitter, Tinder, all of these things that exist in the slot machines that are our phones, rob us of this moment and these precious moments of creativity. And I'll just break down the neuroscience of it, because this is something that's actually relatively new, and this is why I really leaned on the science in the last couple of years to bolster the argument, but also understand the dynamic. So
Mm.
for a long time, people thought that the brain was kind of a binary switch. So it was either active or not active. So it was active during the day and it was not active at night while you're sleeping. Well, we all know now that there's actually massive amount of activity going on while you're sleeping. It's just a different type of activity. And similarly, there's a distinction between focused work and non-focused work. So focused work is obvious, when we're talking or when you're noodling on a problem, your brain is lighting up in certain different areas. But when you're not focused on something, the brain doesn't just rest. What it does is it pivots to something called the default mode network, the DMN. And we now know that it's in these moments of creativity, inspiration, where the default mode network is actually firing on all cylinders. And it's this loose collection of synapses and neurons that kind of connect and basically spot, kind of connections between ideas. So when you kind of alight on a metaphor or an analogy that just comes out of nowhere, that's your default mode network firing up and basically making an association between, as I said, between Roblox and the Rubik's Cube, which I can talk about in a second. And that literally happens when your mind is slightly focused, but not totally focused. And hence the name, the default mode network. And that flurry of activity needs certain conditions for it to occur. And that's when, some people call it boredom. Some people call it, slightly left of center focus. When you're driving down the 405, as I do in Los Angeles, and there's not too much traffic, and I can, kind of still pay attention to the road, but listen to a podcast or maybe not listen to a podcast. That's when the default mode network fires up and I get, thousands of ideas. And I literally have bought an Apple Watch in order to be able to record the ideas that I get on these drives, because otherwise I was, risking life and limb to try to text, my answers to them, which I of course don't want to do. So that's what I'm talking about about these moments of inspiration. And so we are being robbed of those right now in terms of the specific inspiration opportunities that we're getting. And I would say the second part of that definition, which is with intention, I think the next level of some of these distraction engines, again, we call it Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Roblox, all of these things, and they all have a common theme. They are, to a certain extent, robbing us of our intention as well. So one definition of addiction that some people use is that the rewards offered by a certain behavior are so powerful that they overwhelm the negative consequences of that behavior. And therefore you are somewhat powerless to kind of succumb to it. Now, it's obvious with things like drug addictions or other addictions that are, more self-evident. Alcohol is another example where, people literally drink themselves to death or drink themselves out of marriages and jobs. And that's kind of self-evident. But the nature of the addictions that we deal with today are much more subtle, and their negative consequences are real, but just below the waterline. So you can say, as many people do, and I'll say, myself, I have a soft spot for YouTube videos or for Instagram. And, has it cost me a job? Has it cost me a relationship? No. But is it, to the definition I was talking about before, is it robbing me of my intentions? I would say yes. I mean, when you look at the level of mental health issues that teenagers are facing right now, or even the attention deficit issues that adults are facing right now, you could say that their intention was not to, go down the TikTok rabbit hole for 90 minutes, but they did. And that's the kind of pernicious problem we're finding, which is these things are just toxic enough to throw us off our kind of agenda or mandate for the day, or even for the moment. But they're not so bad that they're, leading us into, terrible situations. Although, I would not want to downplay what's happening to adolescents and, body dysmorphia and all these things that are happening with Instagram. But I'll give you another perfect example of this, which you may have experienced yourself, something called revenge procrastination, which is you've worked all day, you've grinded out, you've maybe take 2 podcast episodes. I know you're a consultant, you've, turned around an RFP or, a pitch, and you're just exhausted. And you literally know you should go to sleep because sleep is so important to, mental and physical health. But you want to reward yourself with some kind of brain candy. So even though you're tired, even though it's 11 and you like to go to bed by 10:30, you spend a half hour scrolling on Instagram or on YouTube or, checking the sports scores or whatever it is. That's what they call revenge procrastination, because you are literally disserving yourself. You know better. And I've talked to clients of mine because I'm a strategic advisor and executive coach. They tell me, hey, Ian, I know I'm not supposed to be staying up for an extra half hour. I'm only hurting myself. I'm going to hate myself in the morning, but I got to do this now. And so that's an example of these intention robbing activities that we are almost powerless to resist. And because the impacts are relatively anodyne and mild, we kind of say, well, I can deal without the extra half hour. But over time and cumulatively, as I say, it's robbing us of our intention. And if we get back to this notion of innovation being inspiration plus intention, both the pillars of my definition of
Mm.
innovation are being challenged.